Bill, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ryan. How are you?
I'm excited. So this is our second attempt. You and I tried before, and I'm actually very excited because as I was looking back and saying, okay, well, we got to really capture Bill's story, and you've done some very unique stuff from your journey as an entrepreneur of taking, I just said organized chaos, but you've really taken and systematized making sure people can execute towards the right goals. So why don't you just give everybody an overview of like what you're doing now, and then we'll go back and kind of give everybody the context and talk about really how are you actually making the impact that you are with the companies that people are working with you on.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. And Ryan, the magic is in the rewrite. So,
agreed. I like it. There you go.
Yeah. So for me, my mantra is that I think it's a shame that really good ideas, really good people, and really good companies fail or struggle for completely preventable reasons. There is a science to business, but there's a gap between what science knows and what business does, and that's sort of what my book does. I mean, not completely. I'm not giving you every single thing I've ever learned, over 30 years, et cetera. But I'm a big fan of Pareto. So I sort of took, what are the few things that I've seen in the research I've done and the people I've talked to and the experience I've had, that if you did these things really well, you're well on your way to getting there. So that's what the book is. And it focuses on three areas that I believe are good ones to focus on. I don't have all the answers. I'm not this sort of magical person who has.
But I'll give you before you keep going though. Like when you and I were talking at the Small Giants conference, it's synthesizing the most important part, so that way, like the Pareto's principle, you can make sure that you're focusing on the right thing. So I think there's an art, Bill, to synthesizing the right stuff, and it's a lot of work.
Agreed. Yeah. So that's sort of what I did, and the three areas that I focused on were team. And team is, we always say it's the team, but they don't go into much depth on what does that mean to the team, right? And the team is super important. There's research out there that says that most people are on at least one team. 80 some odd % of people surveyed, and like 20,000 people were surveyed, they're on at least one team. About 60 to 70% of those are on more than one team or two teams. And then another 75% of those are on more than two.
Well. Yeah.
So teams get most of the work done. And as I say in my book, performance is a team sport. You really have to understand how to attract the right people to the team. But first you have to step back and say, okay, what is our team doing, right? What are they trying to accomplish? How do we know when this team is successful? And then what are the pieces that go into making that successful? And that's how you hire, right? We usually hire for an individual. And I think we've learned, especially in sports, in the last 10 or 15 years, that you hire with the concept of the team in mind, and then you find the pieces that are the best ones. And I know that this is, probably not some of your fans will like, but I live in New England, and so I'm very familiar with Bill Belichick. And I think he's done a great job, right? He figured out this is what the team does, right? This is what the overall team does. Here's what the defensive team does. Here's what the offensive team does. Here's what the special teams does. And he hires players not because they're like awesome at one thing. He hires them because he wants them to do a job or a set of jobs. He definitely helps them do that. And I think that really applies well to a leader, right? You really first have to understand what kind of team are we? How do we contribute to the success of the organization? If you're the highest team, being the leadership team, then obviously it's the overall organization. But there are teams that do that as well. So I go into a lot of depth on that. There's a lot of research. Amy Edmondson, Simon Sinek, a lot of these people have really done a ton of research on teams. And then the next thing is that, strategy and execution are not really two different things. They're two parts of the same thing, right? And I have gone to dozens and dozens of, speaking events and more sort of workshop things. And I would ask this question of folks. And I would say, so what's the biggest barrier to growth of your business? And they would often come up with what I would call operational issues, right? We're not doing the right things. We're not doing them well. We're not doing them on time, whatever. And then I say, well, what are you executing on? And then there's usually a pause. And then, they come up with all sorts of answers. And I basically say, look, you're executing on your strategy, right? I said, so what might be happening and why you're frustrated with all these people is that they're executing on their version of the strategy. And if I went to your Monday morning's leadership team meeting and had everyone write down their strategy, in their own words, what the current company strategy is. And by the way, I've done this. And then we read them out loud. I said, what would happen? And I usually get a laugh or a smile, like, oh, they'd be all over the place. And I said, yeah. I said, so your job is to get them literally and figuratively on the same page of what is our strategy. And then the execution will follow from that. So they connect. And then lastly, if you do those things right, strategy is top line, execution is bottom line. You drive cash. Cash should be your primary financial growth metric, which I know you love.
Yeah, I gave you the big old thumbs up for the listeners. I'm like, oh yeah, it's the oxygen, man.
It's the only thing that won't lie to you on your balance sheet or your P&L. Everything else you can make up or move around or pay yourself less or do whatever.
I love it.
And if you want to grow, you have to spend money. And typically you have to spend money in front of growth. So when I work with my clients, we work out a 3-year plan and we say, how much will this plan cost? How many people do we need? What other things do we need? Do we need to buy things, software, facilities, whatever? Then we pull up the financial plan and say, okay, how do we make this happen? And as you know, for someone who helps people to sort of sell their businesses, is when you can show a predictable, you say, hey, 3 years ago, we said we were going to do this, and this, and we did it. And by the way, we're in year 5 and we're still doing it, right? We're just rolling our 3-year plan forward. Your multiple will go up tremendously because, you made yourself redundant probably, which is what they want, right? They don't want you to have to stay in the business. There's predictable revenue. You probably have some what it called remembrance in the attic, right? You've got these things that you're also working on, which aren't necessarily directly contributing, but have that stuff. You can have a multiple that's tens of X as opposed to 3 to 5, which is the standard thing most people kind of go for, and that's all doable and it's been done, but hardly anyone ever does it.
This is gonna be a fun conversation. I love that. No, I love how you opened and set the container for this, Bill, because it's very fascinating and the order of how you lay that out in your book and in your process. Because when I've over the last decade, as I've dove into all hundreds of companies, it's like, okay, and we're going to unpack this of strategy versus execution. Cause EOS has just got so much momentum over the last decade, but then I go in, I'm like, what are you guys aimed at? And they're like, exactly. 20 million in revenue. And the listeners probably get, woohoo. Yeah. And then I was like, well, if we would have sold when we had 20 million in revenue, we would have owed the bank money. So who cares? And so this goal that's been off. But then when I think about it's been me trying to force people into this target equity valuation as a goal. But then as I watch Bill, and this will slide right into your process, is once people have a plan, so let's say I were to build you out your 3-statement model and you're like, okay, we got your target normalized EBITDA years into the future. And you build this forecast. I'm like, Bill, how confident are you that you're going to hit that? And you know what people normally do is meh. And it's because they're missing the people, the strategy. You know what I mean? So they're like, well, great, we got this forecast, but where are we going and why? So I think it's so fascinating how you just rolled in. Well, then it's the strategy, execution, in the people, strategy, execution, and cash, all tied to the long-term goal. Yeah. Tied to, they're all right. Because I think about, let's just have you dive into ops versus strategy. Because I think so many, and maybe difference between goals and strategy. I don't know how you would clarify all that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because the word you use is one I use often, which is confidence, right? I know this is attributed to Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if he actually said it, but it's the one that he says is, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And that's what we do, right? And when you're creating your future, and by the way, you're seeing, oh, we were right, or we were close to right, your confidence builds. And it's not overconfidence. It's not hubris. It's we're really doing the right things. We're zooming out, we're zooming in, we're doing all these things. And strategy is a really interesting word. It's overused so prolifically. It's amazing. Right. And I often, just for fun, cause I usually like to just stir things up. And I could do this because I was a VP of sales 8 times. I've been in sales for 25 years, right?
We're going to get into your story about how this all ties together, but I want to keep your train of thought here. I like it.
When people say, this our sales strategy, I said, there's no such thing as sales strategy. Sales is all execution. Just focus on it's a method. It's an approach. It's not a strategy. A strategy is thinking, right? And what is it? Sun Tzu says, when you don't have strategy, that's the noise before the defeat.
Ooh, yeah.
right?
Yep.
Tactics without strategy is the noise before the defeat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true. That's what happens. And I do the same thing. I actually just did this the other day with a potentially new client. And I just said, let's talk about strategy. And I asked everyone to just give their definition of strategy, just the word. And they were all different. And they were like the plan and the roadmap and whatever. And I said, it's not really a roadmap, right? You can have a strategic plan, but strategy isn't the plan. It's the thinking that drives the plan. It's how are we going to succeed? What are the things that we're going to focus on that really, when they come together as interdependent variables, make the difference, right? And so that's the
it's
focus
the thinking.
of strategy.
Yeah, but you highlighted on such an important part, Bill, because like how many meetings I've been in, people are just picking things in these group meetings that are there when they think they're coming up with a strategy, but there's no thinking going on.
Yeah.
And what would be maybe some examples of the thinking? Like, okay, like what are some of the thoughts people are like the decisions people are thinking through to clarify their strategy?
Yeah. So strategy is primarily about choice, right? And it's choosing mostly what not to do versus what to do. You really have to decide, and this is based upon two things, right? Strategy has two major components to it, or two major areas, which is external and internal. Right? You have to see what is the white space in the industry that either isn't being served or isn't being served as well as it could be, right? And an example of this is Waze, right? Waze decided it wasn't going to be in the maps business. Google said it was in the maps business, right? And they made a much better map, and they put MapQuest out of business, really, and whatever. Mm-hmm. But they didn't really solve the main problem that most people use a map for, which is to get from point A to point B on time. So Waze came at it completely differently and said, so how would we do that, right? What's available? What's out in the marketplace? And they understood that we all had phones, and we had the geo-positioning, and we had the other stuff, the name I can't remember. And they said, how do we use that? And so they came at it a completely different way. And Google bought them for over $1 billion, mm-hmm. right? And they were tiny. They were only 5 years in. They were bought for $1 billion because they looked at the problem differently. They looked at the marketplace and said, what's the white space and what mm-hmm. isn't being served? How can it be served better? So that's sort of one example. And then internally, you also have to make sure that you're doing things that you can be great at and you enjoy.
Right? Caveat on that second part right there, right?
You could be great at it, but if you don't enjoy it, you probably won't do the hard work, because you've done it and you've lived it. And you've seen it, is when you really don't like what you're doing, every day is not very fun. Yeah. And you're not going to make really good decisions.
Yeah. Or like, it's not going to be enjoyable to do the hard stuff because like reward comes after hard work. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you love something, right, and this is sort of the deliberate practice thing that's been going around, right? You really have to love it. The ones who are really great at a skill, be it violin or something else, they love it because you know what? Some of the stuff really sucks. And you just got to do it because you have you're more purposeful in what you're doing.
Yep.
And that's, I'm also a person who this passion versus purpose. I don't think being passionate is really a great asset. And they talk about you have to follow your passion, be passionate. Like passionate is fleeting, but purpose has endurance to it, right? And so when you love something, you're generally tied to your purpose. So what you have to do is say, where's the white space in the industry? How can we be different? Because when it comes to strategy, this is my convoluted sentence, so I'll say it and we can unpack it if you want, is when it comes to strategy, different and better is best, but different is always better than better.
Well, yeah, let's do it again. I like it.
With strategy, different and better is best, but different is always better than better. Better is hard. If you just want to be better than people, then they'll always catch you, and you're just going to keep leapfrogging. It's a marathon that never ends. Mm-hmm. But if you can be different, it's so much easier to be different. And we've seen that from Southwest Airlines, from Apple,
Uber,
early on, and then second, and Google, and whatever. I mean, pick your ones. The companies that are really winning over a long period of time. They're generally unique. And they're just unique enough that it's hard to compete against them. And Southwest is probably the greatest example, right? They're in an industry that is notably one that is constantly in financial trouble. It's not run. I always joke that these airlines are always competing to go out of business so they can get the money from the government first.
Well said, my friend.
But Southwest, didn't do it right. They've never taken any money from the government.
Would you say that? Because wasn't their whole thing what business are we in? We're in the transportation point A to point B, so we compete with buses and railroads and walking, all that stuff. But would you say, Bill, that they've lost that foresight because of what they've been dealing with over the last couple of years?
Well,
kind of proof behind what you're saying.
Yeah. So, I don't know much about what they're doing, but it sounds like what they've done is the model that they put in place, they got a little complacent, right? And when these factors that don't usually come together came together all at once, they ran into trouble and their system couldn't handle it. Right. So my understanding is they're fixing that. But
it all started. Didn't it all start with kind of to your point about these different is what business they were asking themselves, what business are we in question versus doing what the whole industry is telling us we should be doing.
Yeah. So, what often businesses start from the wrong premise in general, because they're looking at the industry and say, how can we be better than they are? Right. The better mousetrap thing, which makes a presumption that the industry is doing it well.
Yeah.
Right. And often it's not, right? At some point, somebody made some arbitrary decision to do something, and everyone just sort of followed along. It's sort of like pricing, right?
Yeah.
How do you price? You look at your competitors and you say, let's see, what are we doing? We don't go to our customer and understand their value and how much it's costing them in time and energy and resources, et cetera. We just assume that these other people know what they're doing. And I will tell you, very often that is wrong. And I think a good example of that is the phone with Apple in 2007. Steve Ballmer made a very bold statement when he was running Microsoft and said, who is going to pay that much money for a phone? They're not going to have any market share at all. And guess what? He was right. In the first year or so, Apple only had about 4% market share, according to some stuff I've read. But they had 50% of all the profit in the industry. So who cares what your market share is? They were taking all the money in, right?
Yeah,
which,
right.
by the way, allowed them to grow and do other stuff, which is exactly what Steve Jobs wanted to do.
And what I don't know how he had worded it, but I don't even think Steve Jobs would have said he was in the phone business anyways, right? I don't know if he was, and I don't know exactly how he would have worded it, but it's kind of the whole looking different, right? Because it's not a phone. It's it's going to be a music player. It's a computer in your pocket.
Yeah. Well, so I think what drove, and I think still drives Apple is, I don't know what their strategy is. I made up these words. I probably read them somewhere, but I think their strategy is simply amazing and amazingly simple.
That's it.
Everything they do is that.
Yep.
Now they do it with technology. They just sort of had it in this container of technology, et cetera. But that's what they do. And they're always trying to strive for that. So he doesn't necessarily care what business he's in. He went into the music business and he said there's a huge gap in this. Talk about a horribly run business, right?
Yeah. Simply amazing, amazingly simple. Yeah. No, I like
how do we do this? How do we make it amazing and simple, right? iTunes was first and then the device was second, right? He said, we need to create this ecosystem first, so then the users can do what they really want to do with music, not the way they're being forced to do it today. And he was fought, tooth and nail. Finally, he got someone to succumb. And as soon as they succumbed, everyone else started to follow along.
Yep.
So I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know about how he thinks about it.
Because you were talking about how you think that most people start on the wrong premise that the industry's doing it right. So that's why the different matters. And I think this goes back to my question of, what is the type of thinking? And I think it's what's the whole the story too of hey, if you gave me an axe to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening it. And it's back to Abe Lincoln. And I think most people are handed a sledgehammer and they just keep hitting the tree and harder. And it's interesting how you've worded that, because it is the thinking. I think a lot of people that my old self from my past, but also a lot of people I've worked with, Bill, they have this gut feeling that they need to spend more time thinking, but they don't know how to do it. And then they devalue it because they're so busy fighting fires, or the dopamine of chasing the fires. how important this part is.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's a couple of reasons why. Is our brain is working against us in this case, right? Because our brain likes conclusion, and it likes answers. And strategy is often about questions. It's not about answers, right? And so it's uncomfortable, and so it doesn't feel right. And we especially in this Western sort of culture equate doing nothing with thinking. Right. And doing nothing is terrible. You're not supposed to ever be doing nothing. You're supposed to, whenever you talk to anybody you haven't seen or a while, or you just met, it's they always tell you how busy they are. It's just so busy. There's so many things going on. Right. And this is sort of like a badge, right?
Like that sounds like it sucks.
Right. I was busy, right? I did 25 years of startups. I know busy, right? I know stuff that when you have 15, 16-hour days, and, even when you're not at work, you're thinking about work. And so I'm like, I try not to be busy at all. I'm trying to do very high value activities, right? And focus my energy on those and try to make them happen, because I know when they happen, they have a big, have an outsized impact. But we don't really have that as a culture. So there's so many things working against us as a leader. When I work with startup founders, they come to me and say, what advice do you have? Because I've done so many, and they're pretty good outcomes. They weren't really me, it wasn't me, but I was part of that. And, I always give them the same two things of advice, which is, first, find a problem worth solving that you enjoy solving, and in a large enough market that you can make a real business out of it. And the second thing I say is, don't run out of money. I said, those are the only two things you have to worry about until you come up with a business model. Right. And Steve Blank has a great example of the definition of a startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model. If you don't find a business model, you are not a business. Don't act like a business. Don't worry about culture and all these things that we're taught. Just figure out, is there something there? Once you do that and you're through that knothole, then
that
you
knothole, I love it. Yeah, I love it so much. I love it so much. And so when you and I were talking at the conference, Bill, you said some kind of phrase that I absolutely resonated with. You were on the way back, I believe, from a sales call with one of your founders in one of the startups, and they said the customer doesn't get it. And I think this is like, can you maybe tell the story, obviously in the colorful way that you did? Because I think it's so on point.
Sure. Yeah. So about 10 or 15 years ago, I was in between startups, and I was asked to do a bunch of consulting stuff. And so a friend of mine asked me to go help this company they were having struggles selling. So I went on 3 sales calls with one of the founders over about a week or so. And each time after each call that didn't really go that well, he said, they just don't get it. And after the third time I heard this, I looked at him and I said, Jason, I said, your sentence is perfect. Your pronouns are wrong. They don't have to get it. You have to get it. You're trying to solve their problem. You're not trying to convince them how smart you are. I know, they don't care how smart you are. They don't care what you do. They only care what you do does for them. And until you figure that out, they will never get it, and you won't have a business. And I don't really think, I think they didn't make it.
Well, it's see how well that works for you over time. So the cost of being right is you have no business.
Yeah.
So, and it's really interesting, Bill, because effectively for 9 years, I've been trying to figure out the messaging for the problem I've been trying to solve. And because I went through it, I knew that the people I was trying to talk to weren't wrong. So I had this weird, that's what stuck me at it for so long. It's I know the problem because I went through it, but it was this messaging and the product pricing fit all the stuff you're talking about. I bumbled my way into, I never ran out of cash, but the energy and all of that. But it's so important to start with that idea and think through that idea the right way. So you don't run out of cash, like you said, and you can build the right team without bringing the wrong people on. I think the order that you laid this stuff out on is just brilliant.
Yeah. Well, so what you said, I think what you said is really insightful and deserves a little more time and energy. So you actually might be solving the right problem and doing it the right way, but people aren't getting it, right? People want to be gotten, right? They want you to get them. And the way you get them is by using words, right? So I had this issue at a company that was called Live Vault, which was really early in the online data protection business. And this was 2005. So they'd been in business for, I think, 8 or 9 years. I'd gone through 7 rounds of funding, and they were still struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me to come in because they wanted to add another channel, and the guy that was doing it wasn't really have the background experience. So, and a really good friend of mine was running sales and marketing. So he brought me in, and I said, look, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, don't expect anything from me. I said, I want a list of our best customers, the ones that love us, and I want to talk to them. And I wasn't doing true customer discovery, for those who know that, which is really the first thing you should be doing in a startup situation. But it was more for me as the sales guy, like, you
got to learn to understand.
Yeah, I want to understand why. What were the things that caused you to purchase from us? And before I did that, I went to three at the same time. I went to the CEO, went to my guy, and I went to the head of marketing. And I said, why do you think people buy from us? And they all said the same thing, which was great. It was insurance. They said, look, it's an insurance sell, right? People will give us a little bit of money every month just in case their data goes away, which in my experience was heartening, because most of the time when I ask that question, they say, because we're awesome.
Yeah. Not only did they answer it, but they also had the same answer, which is also probably encouraging.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I said, great, but I still want to talk to these people. So I went out and I asked a bunch of questions. And there was one question that I asked was really the essence of what I was trying to figure out, which is, what is the most valuable thing that you got out of using our service? And I used thing on purpose because I didn't want to say feature benefit. I didn't want to lead them in any way. I was just thing. And I talked to, I think it was 17 people or so. And I heard the same thing, the same words, like 12 out of the 17, which was set it and forget it. And that was the main reason they wanted the thing. They were super busy, small to medium business owners who said, I know I got to do this. It's important, but I hate it. I've got tapes all over the place. I got to bring them home. I got to put them in a thing. I got to store them. I got to, all this stuff I got to worry about. And you're telling me I get on, this was before mobile, right? So you're getting on a website. Mm-hmm. I'm going to tap a bunch of, hit a bunch of boxes, and then that's it. I don't have to do anything ever again. You do everything for me. They're like, how much does that cost? And they would almost pay anything. So we were selling insurance, but they were buying time. So I just went to my sales guys and said, look, whenever you talk to a new prospect, always say these 5 words. Our best customers love us because it's about set it and forget it. You're super busy. And they're like, oh, you totally get who I am, right? You're in my head. And sales, we never, every quarter, every month, every quarter, every year I was there, beat the last year. And then Iron Mountain bought us for 10x revenue, not 10x EBITDA. 10x.
Interesting.
Revenue.
Interesting that you bring up Iron Mountain too. So first of all, it's so fascinating because you asked the clients, like, what a concept, right?
Crazy.
And
being empathetic. Wow,
yeah,
cool.
Well, and the reason I bring up Iron Mountain is because I was going to bring it up earlier. Are you familiar with Norm Brodsky? Okay, probably because of the Small Giants affiliation. But with Norm, he was on the show, my God, like 6 years ago or something like that. But he asked this question because he had that big failure with his first one, and when he got into the paper storage and the document storage business, back to your point, Bill, the whole industry says, hey, we're in the paper storage business and the recovery archive business. But he actually, what was it like? He was like, we're in the real estate business. And then he started building all of his metrics off of real estate, went on 20 some million in revenue. He was clipping at like 10 or 11 million in cash flow with EBITDA. I'm like, all right, you figured it out. But like, back to your point, it's the thinking, the talking to the clients. And you and I have talked a couple times about this mindset of like the jobs be done. So I haven't, it's been probably 5 years since I interviewed Bob Mosta. So if you want to just, because I think you gravitated towards that philosophy, you want to explain that to the clients or the listeners, because I think it's helpful.
Yeah. So jobs to be done is a management theory that's been around for about 30 years. Bob Mosta, well, there are 2 camps that actually claim it. I don't really care who. It's Bob and this other guy. Clayton Christensen sort of made it famous because he was the HBS professor that everybody knew, wrote a bunch of books. But basically the premise is that people don't buy products and services from you. They hire them to do a specific job or set of jobs for them, which gravitate around 3 main needs, which is functional need, which generally we're good at, right? This is the push and pull of bringing people to you. But then there's also emotional and social needs. And it's kind of based around this premise called progress theory, because your job is to help people make progress, right? To get past this struggle. And progress theory has 4 components. One is the push and the pull, right? So we talked about lawnmowers, right? So you're going to keep your lawnmower until either it breaks, or
and for the record, I was talking about how I was cutting my grass because it was before we hit record, and I was cutting my grass, and then there was like the zero turn. I got a couple acres, and my wife couldn't even see me.
Right. So there's sort of, you're only gonna do something if there's something wrong, there's dissatisfaction, or there's pull, there's sort of envy, right? You see your neighbor, you might have been, doing your 1.5 acres with a push mower, right? And then you see this guy with what's it called again?
Zero turn with a beer hat on or something.
Yeah, the zero turn. Like, oh, I want one of those, right? So that's pulling you. But there's also 2 forces working against you and against any of us, which is called habit and anxiety, right? There, you may not have had this, but people have like, oh, well, it's the fear of the unknown. It's the new. It's like, what if I don't make the right decision? And that sometimes stifles us. Or habit, right? This lawnmower is good enough. It works, whatever. I don't want to, So we don't often solve for the 2 bottom issues, right? In the 2 issues that are pulling us in the opposite direction of progress. And those that really do and understand that go to great lengths to understand those issues with their clients and solve them, right? So they take that habit anxiety away. It's like, hey, don't worry about it. If it doesn't work, you don't like it, it's a 30-day money back guarantee or whatever. Something that sort of takes that fear away. So all of that, sort of this hiring a job and firing it when something better comes along and understanding it, you're trying to help someone with a struggle, right? Overcome a struggle or make progress, as opposed to purchasing something. And those needs are super important, right? So my example is Mercedes versus Toyota. They're both really good cars. They probably both last around the same amount of time. But when you drive a Mercedes, so functionally they're the same, just about, right? I mean, it's a little more comfortable, but in the end, it's not that much more comfortable. But socially and emotionally, okay, when I'm driving around in my C-Class, whatever, man, people are going to say, Bill made it, Bill's on, wow, what's he doing, right? And I'm going to be in there thinking, sitting high in my seat saying, yep, I'm in a Mercedes. I'm going to give my arm out the window. It's like, and that's part of the decision process. We won't admit it, but that is part of our decision process. And that's sort of the whole jobs to be done approach.
I hope you're enjoying the conversation Bill and I are having so far. I wanted to interrupt for a quick takeaway. This entire conversation will be 10 times more useful if you have a target equity valuation at a point in time that you want to achieve, because then everything can fit inside of that plan, because you can understand what kind of team can you afford. How long are we going to be on this plan? Is the strategy the right kind of strategy? And do we have enough resources like cash in order to execute the strategy within the timeline that hits your target equity valuation? If we don't put the entire conversation that Bill and I are having within a wrapper of a goal, the clearly identified outcome of intentional growth that we constantly talk about, how are we knowing what we're pointing our resources of our team and the cash and the strategy and the execution to? We have no idea. It's just kind of crazy when you think about it. So I just challenge you, come up with the target equity valuation at a point in time that you want, and then reverse engineer the 3 financial statements. If you can't do that, go check out the Intentional Growth Starter Kit, where I walk you through in a spreadsheet and a case study on how to do that. If you know what you want from the numbers and the equity valuation and the cash flow, then management and operations will know what they have to work with, and they have a higher probability of accomplishing their goals. And for whatever it's worth, I literally just got done doing a key executive Vistage workshop, and all of the executives in that room, all they ever want is for the ownership group to figure out what they want and why so they can do their jobs. So from the horse's mouth, they want to know. And if you've got a good team, my guess is they do too. So I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Bill. Go check out the starter kit, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Well, and I think it's so helpful, Bill, tied into the strategy, talking to the clients, because if you're going like, it all ties so much into the intentional growth philosophy and mindset, because if you're going to spend decades of your time, money, and energy chasing something, wouldn't it be nice to know you're chasing something that people want and are willing to buy for the right reasons? And then you can start executing on the way there that the clients want. So it's all, and I think, your pull versus push words are wonderful too, because I've personally experienced this, Bill. Like, I was in industries, commodities of copiers. IT services became kind of a solution. Then it became a commodity while I was doing it too. So it was just like trying to force someone to do something. It never hit all the things that you're talking about. And then in my first crack at doing this for the first 5 years, it was like, I couldn't figure out the words and like what the solution or what the problem was, like growth and exit, this and that. But like, when I started talking about goals and intentional growth and progress, all to your point, I didn't actually do anything different with the educational program. I just changed the title from the growth and exit framework to intentional growth. And then, but there's this pull, and like the experience that you're talking about for me emotionally and from the experience in the execution, it seemed like there was such less friction. It's just like the conversations were better. The dialogue was better. The expectation, it's just a different experience when you've tapped into this, the experience like you're talking about, versus even though the solution might be the same thing, you're setting everything off at the right step. So that way the rest of the experience can be great. And I don't know, my interesting way of reflecting on how you,
what was it? I can't remember. What was your first phrasing that you used?
So the program was called the growth and exit framework.
Right. So that was about you.
Because of
right?
what my
I'm
experience.
giving you the growth. But when you said intentional growth, that's about them.
Yeah. And it's about goal setting. And it's not about exiting. It's about, the nuances are so crazy. Because it's about growing an equity value of an asset that gives you choices versus exit planning. People like, whoa, and then they freak out and then they hide in a corner. And so like, but you're like, how you had framed all that up just makes a ton of sense, because those words and that discussion tapped them at an emotionally different level. Otherwise, and that changed everything.
Yeah. To me, that's compassion, right? It's empathy with action. You're like, yeah, I have this growth framework thing I can give you, but it's really all about you. It's about you creating it and making it easier for you to have intentional growth. And as soon as you flip the words, you no longer made it about yourself. Mm-hmm. You made it about them, even though it wasn't about yourself anyway.
Right.
The words you used made it sound like, oh, he's trying to sell me something, as opposed to he's trying to help me.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to thinking is the only way to solve this problem. Thinking and talking to your clients about the problems they're trying to solve. And that's why I love your order when I'm looking over here to your outline of the book, because it's like you have the order. And then once this is done, like Bill, like one of the things that I think myself and a lot of visionaries get frustrated with, you think so much, but you like, I actually do just want to execute, but I don't want to second guess my decisions every day. And I think a lot of the people listening in are the same way. And that's why your order makes so much sense. Because I think a lot of people that go straight to the execution point, but then they don't know where they're going. And it's just like, and they know that anxiety is sitting there because they're like, I don't know if what I'm doing, because second guessing your decisions because they're not tied to a goal that is clear.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The Cheshire Cat said to Alice, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do.
Exactly. So let's, where did this all come from? I know we're kind of probably doing this in the flip, but I like the context.
So none of this, I should say none, but very, very little of this is mine. Right. I'm not that sort of thought leader. Right. So this is all Drucker, Deming, Shine, Bennis, McGregor. This is management science over the last 100 years. The framework is something that I modified slightly, but it's basically from Scaling Up and Vern Harnish, which, by the way, we talked about traction. We've talked about traction in the past, and Gino was a Scaling Up coach for a while. And then he sort of pulled out his own thing and made his own deal. So that's all this is, right? And that's why I keep saying it's out there. But very few people are actually using it because, as you said, they're just busy. Mm-hmm. It's not that they don't want to. A lot of people I talk to are like, I really want to do it. And funny, one guy, it took me 2 or 3 years. I've known him for 10 or 15 years. And we started talking. He's like, I really want to work with you. And I said, okay, great. Let me know. Because I don't push myself on anyone, because what I do is not for the faint of heart. You have to really want to do it. And then about 2 years after we started talking about it, I said, Dimitri, so why did you finally decide to do it? And he said, well, I knew that what you were going to ask me to do was hard and it was going to be a lot of work, and I didn't want to do the work.
Well, you know what? Props to him for actually telling the truth. That's awesome.
So that's what I'm saying. This is hard stuff.
That's funny, Bill, that you say that, because you know what I've always said when people say, "What do you do?" I'm like, I sell hard work.
Yeah, really. Because we're sort of we're circling the same thing, right? Yeah. This is hard. It's trying to figure out what a whole bunch of people want, is really difficult. It's like guessing the stock market or whatever. But it's not impossible. If you talk to enough of them, and I've done this hundreds of times, you'll find that 2 or 3 things keep coming up, right? And one of the tricks that I learned is your job is to basically apply the scientific method. The scientific method is you come up with a hypothesis, you find a target customer or owner, whatever, or end user, and then you try to disprove your hypothesis. And if you can't, then you're onto something. But most people do the opposite. They try to prove that they think what they're thinking is right. And guess what? They find out they're right because, as Simon and Garfunkel said, that they hear what they want to hear and they disregard the rest.
Yeah, and then the true scoreboard is the actual normalized EBITDA and the multiple, but that doesn't get found out until the end when it's too late. Yeah, I love how you phrase that, because we can bullshit ourselves all day long that someone wants. I mean, I did for years. I mean, other than the fact that I went through it, I knew there was a problem. But I love how you said that, because, we want to find. I mean, you and I both being sales guys, get to know as fast as possible, because then if it's not a no, it's yes. Yes. Don't keep it in the maybe category.
Right. And maybe waste a lot of time.
So let's give the listeners a little bit of context. I mean, you've been through multiple startups. I think you even said you were in the early IPO world, and you had this product pricing fit. So you started learning how did all this come to be, where you realized there were some things missing, and why you liked pulling out certain areas to create the order and the framework that you have?
Yeah. So I did 10 startups over 25 years, all here in the Boston area, all high tech stuff. And it was really cool. I was one of the first people in speech recognition. I was one of the first people in e-commerce. I was in the web in 1995, right? The web was invented in 1994, right? With Mosaic. As
my buddy, I date myself, Bill. My buddy, my best friend who from college, he sent me a reel, and it was Katie Kirk and these people going, "Oh, right, you see that was the internet," and it was 94. I'm like, he's like, by the way, our kids are our age. We are our kids' age when this came out. I was like, oh my god.
Right. And by the way, and they were saying it wrong. The internet had been around since the 60s.
Right, DARPA, right?
Whatever it was the web. The internet was really hard to use because you had to do the numbers, and it was just, you had to know what you were doing, and it was a small group of people. And then Andreessen put this, thing over top of it called Mosaic, which was the first browser. Eventually became Netscape. So I did a lot of startups, and I was really lucky. I was 5 for 6. The first 6 either was an IPO or an acquisition, and then the last 4 not so good. So I
bring your batting average down to the normal, normal side.
Still above average. Right?
Yeah, still above. Yeah. Wasn't it like 1 out of 20 that they want? So you're doing all right.
Yeah, so it was pretty good. And so that's sort of what got me going. But I think what's really served me well for things that I find interesting, I'm very, very curious, and so I would constantly say, why did that work? Why did that not work? And I got better and better and so it was interesting. As I got better at learning how to do a startup, the startups didn't work because the founders wouldn't listen to me. They were doing this. They had what's called founderitis, which is they fell in love with their idea. That's the word.
Yeah. What was it? Founderitis?
Yeah, founderitis. They fell in love with their idea and not with the customer or the problem, which is what you need to fall in love with. When you fall in love with your own idea, then all of these biases come, these cognitive biases come, motivated reasoning, status quo bias, cognitive dissonance, whatever, right? All these things come into play. And I couldn't convince any of them. I don't think any of them are around anymore. And so then I kind of said, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to do a lemon startup? And I really did. I love doing startups. I love puzzles. And to me, a startup is just a big puzzle. But between startup 5 and 6, I had this experience where I was basically a coach, right? And I kind of made my own. I wasn't smart enough to know that there was an EOS kind of thing out there. I made up my own. It was basically an EOS-like thing, but it worked tremendously well. So I wanted to do more of that. So I researched a whole bunch of business operating systems, probably about four or five, and then I really thought three of them were interesting. I know it was Scaling Up, EOS, and I can't remember the other one, Value Builder or something like that. And the one that really resonated with me was Scaling Up, which is really where I got this people, strategy, execution. I changed people to team because I don't think people is three things: individual, team, and culture. But team is the most important of those three things. Culture is great, but it attracts and doesn't retain.
Well, and like if you build the right team, you'll have the right individuals and the right culture. I like how you.
Exactly. Yeah. And often the team culture is very similar to the company culture, but it is not exactly the same. People will stay on a great team and a crappy culture, or they'll leave a great culture if they're on a lousy team.
100%, man.
So that's really important. And then so I sort of took that from Vern Harnish and really focused on team. And then I put strategy and execution together from my experience. He has it separate, and I think it's yes, but they're not one after another. He has this sort of loop that he does: people at the top, strategy, execution, and cash. And I just made a second loop between execution and strategy because it continues to loop in there. So that's sort of where I came up with that. Again, no original thinking really.
I hear you, but I mean, like realistically, Bill, that's exactly what I did. Because whenever I start any of our Intentional Growth Academy or the boot camps, I'm like, I did not invent any of this. All I'm doing is trying to synthesize this to make it easier for all of us to actually understand it and then execute it. And it sounds like it's very similar passions of make it so people use it instead of put it back on the bookshelf behind me, right? And
exactly, yeah.
And what I like about your because are you familiar with the value opportunity profile with Ken Sangenario? He's right in your backyard in Boston, and his whole deal is the value opportunity profile, which is where we lean on for the concepts of growing value. Remember when I was showing the 8 functional areas in Summit and Jordan? Is like, hey, there's this company specific risk of the future cash flows that essentially is the multiple. And he has this 8 functional areas, Bill. But and this is going to tie into what you're saying is it's strategy, people, ops, leadership. I could go through all 8, but his whole concept is they all have to be in balance, which I like. So, because you have to have all these functional areas in balance. But where I kind of, and Ken and I have talked through this in the past, is like, but you have to have certain things before other things. You can't just go build out your HR SOP process if you have no financials tied to a plan. You know what I mean? Like, and you need a good team. So I love the order that you had, because there's a reason that people say you can build any business off of a good team, and you got team first. So how did you start? What were some of the experiences where you landed on this order, and how you actually pulled from the other things? What were some of the experiences as you were going through the startups that these things resonated with you?
So I've always sort of been Socratic in my thinking, right? People started to make fun of me after 10 years of being a leader. They're like, oh, here's Bill with his questions. And I joke that I say, look, my job is to, I say I'm a coach, but I'm really Socrates with a tool bag, right? Is I'm coming in asking questions, and based upon your answers, I'm going to pull out what I think is the best appropriate tool to help you get there. So I think that always helped me. So this curiosity that I have with things that I care about, and then this sort of, I used to be different. I used to want to have the answer, right? That the answer was great. And I blame my mother, who's not with us, so I can blame her. Because I grew up in this little cape, right? It's 1,500 square feet in this blue collar town. And for years, I had wood shop or whatever it's called. And I made this thing. We called it the whatchamacallit. But basically it was just this sort of thing you'd hang on the wall. It had 2 little tiny drawers and a little tiny shelf. And on this little tiny shelf was this saying that was there for years. And I remember it, which is, I thought I was wrong once, but I was mistaken. And this is what I grew up with in my house. So being wrong was a bad thing, right? So, but I learned I'm like, well, maybe that's not a really good thing. So I learned that, to take myself out of the equation, become less ego.
Can I ask you, how did you, I love it because I'm resonating with what you're saying. The Tansom family is very competitive. So, and even at dinner. And so, what experience led to you realizing that was not a good mantra?
So I was 23. I was up at Smuggler's Notch in Vermont, just above Stowe, Vermont, so way up in Vermont, and I was playing broom ball. So I'm a 50. I'm 59. I've been playing hockey since I was 5. So like broom ball is just hockey on with boots and a broom, right?
And it's where usually middle-aged men go to get injured during work sports.
Yes, exactly. And I've been injured many times, but it's another story. So I'm playing this game, and I'm not really that good at it, right? And I'm really frustrated. My team's losing, but I'm thinking, no, I'm going to be great. I know how to do this. I actually went to college to play hockey. I was a pretty good hockey player. I played against guys who played in the NHL. I was not a bad hockey player. But I'm terrible at this thing. And I'm getting more and more frustrated. And I was behind the other guy's net, and I was battling this guy for the ball. And I just was so angry. I took my broom and I cross-checked him in the face.
Oh, no.
Right? And at that moment, I said, what are you doing? Why would you ever get so wrapped up with having to win and be right, that it takes over your actions? So it was then and there, I just said, I'm never going to do that again. I then, I looked at different things. I became a student of Stoicism, which really has helped me a lot as well. And I think that has guided me a lot, right? Wow, you're never going to know all the answers. You can't control everything in your life, but you can control how you respond to it. And I constantly try to, I'm still a human being and don't do it every time. Yep. But that's really sort of what got me there.
Thank you for sharing. Seriously, that is, I really appreciate that. And I'll reciprocate because I had, there's 2 experiences. One, Bill, I was sitting in I was 23 as well, actually. I was sitting in an executive meeting with my dad, our GM at the time, and Canon. We were a reseller Canon. So they were like, we were beholden to Canon at that point before we started diversifying into other products and services. And we're sitting there, Bill, and I really despised our GM. I watched him take advantage of my father many times, and there's a lot of these things. And I'm sure there was both sides of the story, but at that point in time, I was young, family business. I was protective of my dad, and we were trying to diversify how we were selling, and because Canon wanted to know, and they're like, they said, are you selling just solutions? And this gentleman says, oh yeah, we're doing this. And I just was like, we are not. And I just, oh my God, we got out and my dad grabbed me. He was like, don't you ever do that. There's a delicate dance to business and life. And you don't just go in there bowling a China shop. That gut stomach ache that I just got telling that story, it takes something hard. And I think how you word that, it's how you respond to those events that then going forward. It sucks, man. That is eating crow to a whole nother degree. But how did that experience change your leadership style and how you are referring to teams and how building teams and how that impacts building teams?
Yeah. So I realized that I don't need to have all the answers. I don't need how to do everything. And so but my job is to create the atmosphere for those people to succeed, right? Give them the direction, the vision, and whatever you want to call it. And then say, look, I almost always had the same 2 rules with my teams. I said, okay, what we're trying to accomplish. We've discussed, debated, and decided, right? And we've aligned on that. I said, I don't really care how you do it. So if you're a salesperson, I said, look, if you want to make 1,000 calls to make your quota, or you want to do a lot of research and make 10 calls to make your quota, and you're successful at it, my only 2 rules are you need to be honest and responsible, right? You're responsible to us as a company and to the customer. As long as you're those 2 things, I don't care how you do it, right? As long as you're moving. And if something happens and you made a mistake, but you were intentionally trying to go to that goal, then fine, let's figure out what happened and fix it for next time, right? If you're being dishonest, then we have a different conversation.
Well, and how does I love it. Is what I've found, because I learned this all the hard way, man, is because I like to lead like that too, because I realized a long time ago, I'm like, I can't be, I don't want to know all the answers. And actually I look through that experience and multiple other experiences in the turnaround. I was like, okay, I just need a team that understands what we're trying to accomplish, because I can't spend the time. But what I realized is that how powerful it was to give the KPIs that are tied to the goal. And if I didn't have the right goal, I couldn't give them a numbers, and then I had to do their job with them. So it was like all this like self-reinforcing up or self-reinforcing down. There was like almost no in between. And so like where in that, as you were doing that with your team, did you learn that the strategy and goal was important first, or did you realize that as you're doing that with the team that you needed to have the goal? Like how did the goal come into play with your thinking?
Yeah. So to me, vision is the most important, right? When we're successful, what does that look like? And sales was easy, right? Because it was very, very target oriented. But when I became a GM, and that's a different thing, that's super important because, you know, a leader, the only thing that I found that all leaders have in common is followers. That's it, right? Now, how do you create followers? You create followers by saying, here's where we're going, right? Because they want to know, if you're leading me, where are you taking me? You need to tell them where you're taking them. And then the other thing you have to have is courage. So the only real attribute I saw that was across all leaders, whether we thought they were good leaders or not, because everyone has their opinion, because one person's great leader is a horrible leader, right? And probably horrible in this situation, but Donald Trump is a good example, right?
I mean, like, you can't deny that Hitler had millions and millions of followers, even though he was a horrible human being.
Yeah, exactly, right? So they decide if you're their leader or not. You can never proclaim I'm the leader. You can say I'm the boss, I have authority, right? But you're never the leader unless you're chosen. So you need to give them that ability to choose you, and then the courage to, in essence, give your vision away, right? And say, look, in order for this to happen, I need your help, and give them autonomy, do all these things. There's a whole bunch of things I've written in a post. Like there's 9 different things of courage you have to be a good leader. Other than that, humility, charisma, integrity, service. If you look at, Steve Jobs didn't really have integrity. Warren Buffett didn't have a ton of charisma. Neither did Bill Gates, right? They market on the things that they're good at, right? And then if you're a great leader and you have a great vision, people will forgive you a lot of your faults, right? I mean, people just said, oh, that's just Steve being Steve, but I'm not going to leave the company because of that. I want to keep going. So I think that's the most important thing you have to do. And by the way, if you do that, vision drives strategy, and strategy drives tactics, and tactics are your goals, etc.
And the people are the ones executing.
Eventually, when you're a good leader, and not to sort of put you on the spot, is I think if you're a really good leader and you do that well, you don't have to give them the KPIs. They figure the KPIs out for themselves.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I would probably agree with you with a slight tweak. Is like I think you can be a lot more general and higher level with your KPIs because, like, I mean, sales, ops, finance. I mean, you're going to have certain top line numbers, but like to your point, like I guess my experience, Bill, is that like once you have that vision, people's ability to do a good job as adults is pretty high.
Pretty high. Yeah, give them their brains back.
There you go. Give them their brains back, right? Trust them to make a decision. And it's okay to fail, right? I mean, how do you treat failure with your teams?
So I haven't had a team in a long time. I'm a team of one. But it was, as long as it was, so the example I can give is in sales. I said to my team, look, here's the deal. Imagine a funnel, and that's the product roadmap, right? So we're basically selling the product and the product roadmap, the present, and then the promise of the future. I said, and the product roadmap because that's been shared with you. And you have to do SWOT, right? Which is sell what's available today, but it was always a startup. So there was always this sort of more future looking thing. They weren't just buying the product that you had, but the promise of the future. I said, as long as you stay within this funnel and the inside of the funnel, then you're okay. You have to convince us why we need to do something sooner rather than later. But if you go outside the funnel, you're going to have a really hard time getting someone here to back you because now you're asking us to be in a different business, right, than we want to be in. And now if we do that, we're going to create 2 companies. One company that did the old thing and then one company that did the new thing. Now, it wouldn't be that discreet, but that's in essence what we're doing. And now we can have that discussion at a high level. Is it worth doing it? Is that where the industry is going? But on a deal, you can't do that on a deal. You'll never win that deal, right? And I said, as long as you're doing that, then I was like, okay, if it didn't work, let's figure out why it didn't work, right? And I would do something similar, but not as compact as an after action review. which is a military, there's like 4 questions.
Almost like
So we do that.
like what do they call postmortem and like manufacturing job pricing, like budget to actual. It's like, hey, what happened? What didn't happen? Why did it work?
Yeah. There's 4 questions they ask, and so what was the mission? It's a kind of
you know what's really interesting.
That was generally how we try to do it.
You know what's super cool, man, is like and I'm thinking out loud right now, is that like when you have the vision and the clear goal of the multidimensional, it's not just a revenue, it's the strategy vision goal that Bill and I are talking about here, is that what I've noticed, Bill, is because this is, I mean, you can probably tell that this is very near and dear to my heart, is I need to understand in order for me to work with other individuals is what's your intention, right? Because like I got too surprised over people's intentions or lack of over the years. And what I've noticed personally is that if we're unified and we spend a disproportionate amount of time getting clear on the same page, then if someone messes up, I could give 2 shits because I know they tried. Yeah. You know what I mean? Versus like if we don't have that goal, I'm like, why did you do that? And there was no ability to know why they did it. Was it self-motivation? Right. Was it your pocketbook? Was it your friend? You know what I mean? Like there's no ability to understand what's driving someone versus if it's the goal, they're going to bail faster because they don't like the goal or the vision versus like, I don't know. Just more, like I said, more anecdotal commentary as we're thinking about this, but like, it's so important to me to be like, why are you doing what you're doing? And then I've got a ton of grace for people.
Yeah, agreed. And David Marquette, who's wrote Turn the Ship Around, he turned it from being a command and control model because he couldn't to being an intention model, right? He said eventually, because he took over a submarine that at the last minute, and generally you study for a year before you captain a submarine because you have to know everything that happens in the submarine and how to do everything. And he couldn't. So he couldn't do the model. So he said, basically, I'm going to get the hell out of the way. He said, I have one rule, safety. My job is to keep everyone safe. And so I would make sure if there was a missile or something, that was me. But everything else was, Captain, I intend to blah, blah, blah. And he's like, fine. Right?
Your intentions sound great.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And he said, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a great little video he does,
awesome.
Which is, he says he looks like a dummy, right? Because he said you came on my ship, you wouldn't know who the captain was, right? Because everyone else was doing everything.
Interesting. I love it. So very fascinating, man. I like that a lot. This has been a lot of fun. I'm really happy we redid the shot here. Is there anything I'm not asking that I should?
No, I think we covered a lot. So the only thing that I'd like to wrap up with is that, I have 2 things. One is my mantra is great leaders fire themselves from the day to day because they realize that few things truly matter, but those that do matter tremendously. And their job is to figure out what those few things are for their main stakeholders, right? And your main stakeholders are typically your team and your customers. So that's the essence of what I do and how I do it. And you didn't ask me my definition of intention.
I'm going there. Look at you. You're prepped. I give you your first shot at that. But I think what's interesting, Bill, is like there was a guy, Mike Spack. Shout out to Mike because he's been on the show and actually he sold his business after going through the material. And this guy, Bill, he's an engineer by profession, so I'll give him like he's a thinking machine. But I was asking him, I'm like, Mike. I'm trying to think of even how I framed the question, but I think this is what you're doing too, Bill. Mike said it because I said it. I'm like, how do you explain to other people like all of the prep work and why? Like, because I know what I did, Bill. So this gentleman, Mike, and I are very similar to like where people on the outside think that they kind of get like mixed signals. It's like, man, you just make decisions like it's like off the cusp, and you'll just pull the trigger with not a lot of perception of thought. Or you'll spend so much time thinking. So it's like almost both at the same time. And I asked Mike, I'm like, how do you think about that? Because he seems like he's the same kind of guy. And he's like, I do all of the prep work so I can be a decision-making machine. So when you had mentioned like that stuff that matters, that missile or whatever that one thing might be, you have all of the prep, all of the data to immediately deal with that. If you have to make a fast decision, you can do that. But it's all the prep work that allows you to be a decision-making machine is kind of what you're doing. It's like all that clarity, all the data, all the people, so that way you can make those fast decisions without being paralyzed. And I think that's what you're helping people do is making sure that, as the leaders, the ripple effect of capital, time, and energy of where you're deploying that, it's a big deal over a longer period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I do is I say, look, your decisions as a body, as a leadership team, your job is to make decisions. Now, to me, it's to make as few decisions as possible, right? And the highest value decisions. So you're constantly, I'm trying to shed, these little decisions, the operational decisions. You should make it so you don't make those. And the ones that you do, to me, is it getting me closer to my vision, right? So is it cohesive going up? And is it not violating who we are?
Oh, I like that.
Right. So this is in Small Giants parlance, this is like Riel Manufacturing, right?
Yep.
They almost went out of business because a decision they made 10 years earlier that violated their quality value. And they started making hinges for laptops. And so they had to lower quality to keep their prices down. And when who's the author? I'm totally blanking.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know exactly the story you're talking about.
Small Giants, right? Yep. The book.
Oh, you're talking about Bo. I thought you were talking about the reels. Yeah.
Yeah, when Bo went back, they found out that it was a decision 10 years earlier, almost put them out of business. Right? That's crazy.
Isn't that great? Interesting? There's a psychologist that I follow that he says that the things that we do that are not aligned with our values and that are not aligned with our values and our ideal. He goes, reality has an amazing way of snapping that back into order. Yeah, exactly. And it might take 10 years, but you can guarantee that the reality will snap back and it'll hit you. You just don't know where it came from, but you can always follow that thread back.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Last two questions. We'll do the definition of intentional and then where can people find you?
All right. So definition intentional for me is about being deliberate, right? Is you need to create this environment so you can make deliberate decisions, just as we were talking about, right? Is this getting me closer to where I want to be? Is it who we are? What are the parameters on which we can make these decisions? And then you just move ahead and your growth is deliberate. So when I work with my clients, we eventually get to about 1.5 to 2 years in, depending on them. We create a 36-month forecast, which is revenue, profit, cash, people, and widgets. And then we just check it and see how we're doing. And then we roll it. And the next year comes, we roll it it's always 3 years. So they're being very deliberate as they go month by month on what they're doing. So to me, that's what intention is.
Where can people find you?
So all my stuff is on my website, which is catalystgrowthadvisors.com. We talked a little bit about my book, which I have right here.
Further Faster. Love it.
Further Faster. It's also behind me on the wall.
I saw that too. I love it.
You can download it for free, or you can go to Amazon Audible and get it. I do a blog post or a newsletter, whatever you want to call it, twice a month. A lot of, as you said, I'm very much into do-it-yourself, actionable things. I'm very much into actionable things. And my contact info, all that stuff is on there. So it's catalystgrowthadvisors.com.
Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show. I had a blast.
Thanks for having me on again.
I love it.